these chats in 2009, what sorts of struggles did you guys talk to each other about?
Well, at the time, she never talked to me about any questions of gender or anything of the sort. She identified as a gay man at the time. We mostly talked about her difficulties growing up, her struggles with her family, and her struggles in school, and her difficulties prior to joining the military. And she did speak extensively about her role in the military as an intelligence analyst, and she did speak about some difficulties she had adjusting to the culture and with other soldiers who had harassed her. But overall, she still expressed a belief in the military as a force for good made of diverse people.
And you, at the time, were a gay man, as was Bradley, but you independently came to these similar statuses. Is that right?
Yes, I started transitioning last year. There's evidence that she was considering transitioning as early as 2010, if not earlier.
And when you referred to Bradley Manning, because at the time certainly he was Bradley, when you refer to him as saying that people were harassing him, were they harassing him for being a gay man? For what?
Well, she didn't seem to fit in very well with the military's culture sometimes. People seemed to see her as vulnerable. She was short-statured, and she did seem to have difficulty relating to other people there. As it came out in the trial, her coworkers testified that she often cared about doing her job much more than others seemed to. She often made it a goal to go above and beyond, and she might have been bullied for being effeminate, and still at the time, under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, being openly a gay man, let alone being openly trans, would have meant being separated from the Army.
Do you think any of this had anything to do with what Bradley Manning did with the WikiLeaks, or is that just a completely separate and apart situation?
I think it's absolutely related to her state of mind at the time and the decisions she made. It came out in the sentencing phase of the trial when various people she had talked to in the military, psychologists and counselors, spoke about how she had had many previous, incidents where it became obvious that she was in need of imminent treatment. And yet this was often pushed to the side because the unit was underpowered and they could not afford to lose any analysts. She did not receive the care she needed, particularly because receiving care for gender dysphoria would have meant separation from the Army. And this is unnecessary because although the Army does exclude trans people currently, there's no reason for this to be the case. Our allies such as Israel, Britain, Canada, Australia, all of them allow trans people to serve openly. So this was really a very unnecessary situation, and as the psychologists and counselors testified at the time, this created extreme stress for her, and it could have affected her decision-making abilities.
Lauren, as you know, because Bradley Manning's in custody and the Army says it does not provide hormone therapy or gender reassignment surgery, Manning's lawyer would have to sue to change that. What's your reaction? Do you think the attorney needs to do that?
I think it's very necessary. I think it's very necessary that she receive the treatment she needs while incarcerated.
Ask for a wounded person to pick up a weapon so that he can have a reason to engage. For me, this seems similar to a child torturing hands with a magnifying glass. While saddened by the air weapons team's crew's lack of concern about human life, I was disturbed by the response to the discovery of injured children at the scene. In the video, you can see the Bongo truck driving up to assist the wounded individual. In response, the air weapons team crew, as soon as the individuals are tracked, they repeatedly request for authorization to fire on the Bongo truck, and once granted, they engage the vehicle at least 6 times. Shortly after the second engagement, a mechanized infantry unit arrives at the scene. Within minutes, the air weapons team crew learns that children are in the van, and despite the injuries, the crew exhibits no remorse. Instead, they downplay the significance of their actions, saying, quote, "Well, it's their fault for bringing their kids into a battle," unquote. The air weapons team crew members sound like they lack sympathy for the children or their parents. Later, in a particularly disturbing manner, the air weapons team crew verbalized enjoyment at the sight of one of the ground vehicles driving over a body.
Bradley Manning discussing the video showing U.S. helicopter pilots killing 12 people in Iraq, including 2 Reuters employees. Manning went on to tell the court he was encouraged by the public reaction to the video's release. He said he hoped the public would be as alarmed as him about the conduct of the aerial weapons team crew members. Listen carefully.
I hope that the public would be as alarmed as me about the conduct of the aerial weapons team crew members. I want the American public to know that not everyone in Iraq and Afghanistan were targets that needed to be neutralized, and rather people who were struggling to live in the pressure cooker environment of what we call asymmetric warfare. After the release, I was encouraged by the response in the media and general public who observed the aerial weapons team video. As I hoped, others were just as troubled, if not more troubled, than me by what they saw.
That was Army whistleblower Bradley Manning reading a prepared statement in court last month, a statement you were not supposed to hear.
Pretext.
What about what President Obama said in San Francisco? He was at a fundraiser. It was disrupted by people deeply concerned about what's happening to Bradley Manning. He didn't know he was being recorded. I think it was on a cell phone, and he said something like, well, he broke the law.
One of the cardinal rules of being a president is that you don't decree private citizens guilty of crimes before they've been adjudicated of having been convicted of a crime. And amazingly, even John Mitchell, the most corrupt attorney general in American history, knew that because Richard Nixon once stood up in the middle of the Charles Manson trial, who everyone thought was guilty, while the jurors were sequestered and said, he's killed 8 people. And John Mitchell knew that was inappropriate, that you can't do that, and forced Nixon to retract it. Here, it's much worse for Obama to do that because Bradley Manning is a member of the military under his command. The people who will decide his guilt are inferior officers to Obama's commander-in-chief. It's an amazing amount of overt and improper influence on the military process.
Well, I think that under the disguise of a sheep's clothing, he's been a wolf. That because the nightmare of the Bush presidency that preceded him, people forgave him a lot. He was a great hope for change. The color of his skin, the upbringing, the internationalism, the globalism seemed all evident. And he's an intelligent man. But he has taken all the Bush changes and he's basically put them into the establishment. He's codified them. That's what's sad. So we're going into a second administration that is living outside the law and does not respect the law as a foundation of our system. And he is a constitutional lawyer. You know, without the law, it's the law of the jungle. They say Nuremberg existed for a reason and there was a reason to have trials. There's a reason for a due process, habeas corpus, they call it in the United States.
Do you agree?
I agree totally.
Yeah.
If you look at his domestic policy, he didn't break with the Wall Street friendly policies of the Bush administration. If you look at his transparency, he claimed to be the transparency president when he was running for office. There hasn't been transparency. We've been actually classifying more documents under Obama than we did under Bush. All previous presidents between 1917 and 2008 indicted 3 people total under the Espionage Act. Obama has already indicted 6 people under the Espionage Act. The surveillance hasn't stopped. And the incarcerations without bringing people to trial hasn't stopped. So those policies have continued. And then the war policies and the militarization policies, we maintain that. We're fighting wars now in Yemen, Afghanistan. We're talking about keeping troops in Afghanistan. We haven't cut back on the things that we all found so odious about the Bush administration, and Obama has added some of his own. The drones policy, Obama had more drone attacks in his first 8 months than Bush had his entire presidency. And these are a very, very dubious international legality. And
Peter's more hopeful on the second term that there would be some more flexibility. We hope so, but there is a system in place that is enormous, the Pentagon system.
Yeah, it almost seems like he took the odious CIA policies and just branded them. So it's now acceptable that the assassinations, the extrajudicial judge, jury, executioner of people without due process. It's fascinating.
I mean, we complained during the Bush years that Bush was actually conducting surveillance without judicial review. Surveillance. Obama's killing people, targeted assassinations without judicial review. That to us is obviously much more serious.
Absolutely. And to the history, you cover Pearl Harbor, which of course led to the internment of Japanese American citizens. I don't think a lot of people really acknowledge that, once again, an underreported aspect of really what that meant. when you look at the surveillance grid in America today, it almost seems like it is an open-air internment camp where they don't need to intern people anymore because we have this grid set up in place. What do you guys think about that?
The U.S. government now intercepts more than 1.7 billion messages a day from American citizens. 1.7 billion. That's email, that's telephone calls, that's other forms of communication. Can you imagine that, 1.7 billion? We've got this apparatus set up now with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, over 1 million people with top security clearances. We've created this kind of nightmarish state. This is a 1984 kind of state in many ways. We say, well, Obama's trustworthy.
5 million clearances, 1 million top security clearances. That's a pretty heavy number. In other words, we are living in a fishbowl, and I think the sad part is that kids, the younger people, accept it. They're used to invade. They don't say, well, you know, and it's true. I mean, how can we follow the lives of everybody? But the truth is that we're all ultimately watching ourselves. It is an Orwellian state. It may not be oppressive on the surface, but in our hearts we have to have a certain. There's no place to hide. There's really no place to hide. Some part of you is going to end up in a database somewhere.
And it can become oppressive on the surface. One of the things we feared after 9/11 was that if there was a second terrorist attack like 9/11, the Constitution would be gone. I mean, the crackdown would be so egregious at that point. And there's still this obsessive fear. The United States fears things. We fear the rest of the world. We spend as much money on our military security intelligence as the rest of the world combined. You know, do we have enemies? Are we really so threatened? Do we really need this anymore? Is that what our priorities should be? And we think not. We want to turn that around.
Yeah, the evisceration of the rule of law, especially, you know, most notably the National Defense Authorization Act, which eradicates due process and our basic fundamental freedom in this country. I wanted to also bring up another interesting point that really struck me in the film series, which was the kamikaze pilots who, you know, they were brave. They were considered, it was the bravest act that you could do. And then I can't help but think of suicide bombers today. And, you know, Bill Maher, he goes out and loses his show for saying these people are brave. And then you have people like Ron Paul get up there and talk about blowback as a reality. And he's ridiculed. I mean, how do we get here where the discourse is just so dumbed down, or we can't even acknowledge obvious truths such as that?
Primitive discourse. Yeah. There's been a blind worship of the military and patriotism, jingoism, it used to be called. I strongly believe in a good military and a strong military, but to defend our country, not to invade other countries and to try to conquer the world. And I think there's a huge difference, and it's been forgotten. Morality. Once you take the law away, as Einstein once said famously, if a country doesn't obey its laws, the laws will be disrespected. So it seems that a fundamental morality has been lost on us somewhere along the way recently. And it's who wins. It's what's effective. Can we kill bin Laden without having to bring him to trial? Can we just get it done? And that get it done mentality justifies the ends. And that's where countries go wrong and people go wrong. All our lives are moral equations. Does the end justify the means? No, it never did.
And the other side of what you're asking is about the constraints upon political discourse in this country. Why are people so uninformed? That's what we're trying to deal with in this series. If people don't understand their history, then they don't have any vision of the future and what's possible. If they think that what exists now, this tyranny of now, is all that is possible, then they can't dream about the future. They can't imagine a future that's different from the present. That's why we're saying people have to understand their past, because if you understand the past, if you study the past the way we're presenting it, then you can envision a future that's actually very, very different. And we've come very close on many occasions to going a very different direction in the future. We came very close in 1944, 1945. To avoiding the atomic bombing and potentially maybe not having the kind of Cold War that we had. We came very close in 1953 upon Stalin's death to ending the Cold War. We came close in 1963 when Kennedy was assassinated to ending the war in Vietnam, ending the Cold War, having a very different direction. The early Carter years, again, was a possibility of a different direction. And at the end of the Cold War in 1989, Gorbachev was reaching out to Bush. Did Bush take that olive branch that Gorbachev was giving him? No. Very much different. What do we do instead? We applaud the Soviets for not invading when countries were liberating themselves from the Soviet Union, and then we immediately go and we invade Panama, and then we invade Iraq, And so we're saying that that's great. That's great that you show restraint, but we're not going to because we're the hegemon. As Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State under Clinton, says, if the United States if we use force, it's because we're the United States of America. We're the indispensable nation, she said. We see farther and stand taller than other nations. That's the attitude that Oliver and I are challenging, the sense of American exceptionalism. The United States is the city upon the hill, God's gift to humanity.